Section 12. A Daughter of the Sioux. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Mike Vendetti. MikeVendetti.com. A Daughter of the Sioux by General Charles King. Chapter 12. The Ordeal by Fire. That action had been resolved upon, and prompt action was now apparent. Stabber, fighting chief though he had been in the past, had had his reason for opposing the plans of his new and vehement leader, but public sentiment, stirred by vehement oratory, had overruled him, and he had bolted the field convention in a fury. Lame Wolf, a younger chief than Stabber, had yet more power among the Ogalallas, being Red Cloud's favorite nephew, and among the Indians at least, his acknowledged representative. Whenever called to account, however, for that nephew's deeds, the wary old statesman promptly disavowed them. It was in search of Lame Wolf, reasoned Ray, that Stabber had sped away, possibly hoping to induce him to call off his followers. It was probably the deeper strategy of Stabber to oppose no obstacle to Ray's advance until the little troop was beyond the Elk-Tooth Ridge, where, on utterly shelterless ground, the Indian would have every advantage. He knew Ray of old, knew well that, left to himself, the captain would push on in the effort to rescue the stage people, and he and his command might practically be at the mercy of the Sioux, if only the Sioux would listen and be patient. Stabber knew that to attack the troopers now, entrenching at the cottonwoods, meant a desperate fight in which the Indians, even if ultimately triumphant, must lose many a valued brave. And that is not the thoroughbred Indian's view of good generalship. Stabber was old, wily and wise. The new chief, whoever he might be, seemed possessed of a mad lust for instant battle, coupled with a possible fear that unless the golden moment were seized, Ray might be reinforced, and could then defy them all. Indeed, there were veteran campaigners among the troopers who noted how often the tall red chief pointed in sweeping gesture back to Moccasin Ridge, troopers who even at the distance caught and interpreted a few of his words. "That's it, sir," said Winsor confidently to Ray. "He says more soldiers coming, and I believe he knows." At all events, he had so convinced his fellows, and even before Stabber reached the Middle Tooth, where sat a little knot of mounted Indians, signaling apparently to others still some distance to the north, with a chorus of excellent yells, the long, gaudy, glittering line of braves suddenly scattered, and lashing away to the right and left, dozens of them darted at top speed to join those already disposed about that big circle, while others still, the main body, probably 70 strong, after some barbaric show of circus evolutions about their leader, once more reined up for some final injunctions from his lips. Then, with a magnificent gesture of the hand, he waved them on, and, accompanied by only 2 young riders, rode swiftly away to a little swell of the prairie just out of range of the carbines, and there took his station to supervise the attack. "Damn him," growled old Winsor. "He's no charger like Crazy Horse. He's a Sitting Bull breed of general, like some we had in Virginia," he added, between his set teeth. But Ray heard and grinned in silent appreciation. "Set your sights and give 'em their first volley as they reach that scorched line," he called to the men along the northward front, and pointed to a stretch of prairie where the dry grass had lately been burned away. "500 yards will do it. Then aim low when they rush closer in." "Look at the Middle Tooth, Captain," came the sudden hail from his left. "Mirror flashes, see?" It was Field who spoke, and life and vim had returned to his voice and color to his face. He was pointing eagerly towards the highest of the knobs, where, all of a sudden, dazzling little beams of light shot forth toward the Indians on the lowlands, tipping the war bonnet and lance of many a brave with dancing fire. Whatever their purport, the signal seemed ignored by the Sioux, for presently 2 riders came sweeping down the long slope, straight for the point where sat Red Fox, as for want of another name we must for at present call him, who for his part, shading his eyes with his hand, sat gazing toward the westward side of his warrior circle, evidently awaiting some demonstration there before giving signal for action elsewhere. Obedient to his first instructions, the main body had spread out in long, irregular, skirmish rank, their mettlesome ponies capering and dancing their eagerness. Chanting in chorus some shrill, weird song, the line was now slowly, steadily advancing, still too far away to warrant the wasting of a shot, yet unmistakably seeking to close as much as possible before bursting with the final charge. And still the red leader sat at gaze, oblivious, for the moment, of everything around him, ignoring the coming of orders possibly from Lame Wolf himself. Suddenly the silver armlets once more gleamed on high. Then, clapping the palm of his right hand to his mouth, Red Fox gave voice to a ringing war-whoop, fierce, savage, and excellent. And almost at the instant, like the boom and rumble that follows some vivid lightning flash, the prairie woke and trembled to the thunder of near 1,000 hoofs from every point of the compass, from every side, yelling like fiends of some orthodox hell. Down they came, the wild warriors of the frontier, in furious rush upon the silent and almost peaceful covert of this little band of brothers in the dusty garb of blue. 100, 200, 300 yards they came, centering on the leafy clump of cottonwoods, riding at tearing gallop, erect, defiant, daring at the start, and giving full voice to their wild war cry, then bending forward, then crouching low, then flattening out like hunted squirrel. For as the foremost in the dash came thundering on within good carbine range, all of a sudden the watchdogs of the little prairie fort began to bark. Tiny jets of flame and smoke shot from the level of the prairie, from over dingy mounds of sand, from behind the trunks of stunted trees, from low parapet of log and leather. Then the entire grove seemed veiling itself in a drifting form of blue, the whole charging circle to crown itself within a dun cloud of dust that swept eastward over the prairie, driven by the stiff, unhampered breeze. The welkin rang with savage yell, with answering cheer, with the sputter and crackle of the rifle and revolver, the loud bellow of Springfield, and then, still yelping, the feathered riders veered and circled, ever at magnificent speed, each man for himself, apparently, yet all guided and controlled by some unseen yet acknowledged power. And in 5 minutes, save where some hapless pony lay quivering and kicking on the turf, the low ground close at hand was swept clean of horse and man. The wild attack had been made in vain. The Sioux were scampering back, convinced but not discomfited, some few of their number borne away stunned and bleeding by comrade hands from underneath their stricken chargers. Some 3 or 4, perhaps, who had dared too much, were now closing their eyes on the last fight of their savage lives. To Ray and to many of his men, it was all an old story. Stabber would never have counseled or permitted attack on seasoned troopers, fighting behind even impoverished shelter. Something, perhaps, had occurred to blind his younger rival to the peril of such assault, and now, as 3 or 4 little parties were seen slowly drifting away toward the ridge, burdened by some helpless form, other couriers were thundering down at Red Fox, and wild excitement prevailed among the Elk-Teeth. More signals were flashing, more Indians came popping into view, their feathered bonnets streaming in the rising wind, and about the prairie wave, where the savage general had established field headquarters, a furious conference was going on. Stabber had again interposed, and with grim but hopeful eyes, Ray and his fellows watched and noted. Every lull in the fight was so much gain for them. 12:52, said the dark-eyed commander, swinging his watch into the pocket of his hunting shirt, and sliding backward into the stream bed. All serene so far. Watch things on this front, Field, while I make the rounds and see how we come out. All serene so far it was. Not a man hurt. 2 of the sorrels had been hit by flying bullets, and much amazed and stung thereat, but neither was crippled. Bidding their guards to dig for water that might soon be needed, Ray once more made his way to the northward side and rejoined Field and Winsor. In the almost cloudless sky of steely blue the sun had just passed the meridian and was streaming hotly down on the stirring picture. Northward, the ridge line and the long gradual slope seemed alive with swarms of Indian warriors, many of them darting about in wild commotion. About the little eminence where Stabler and the Fox had again locked horns in violent altercation, as many as 100 braves had gathered about the middle knob, from whose summit mere flashes shot from time to time, was still another concourse, listening apparently to the admonitions of a leader but recently arrived, a chieftain mounted on an American horse, almost black, and Ray studied the pair long and curiously through his glasses. "Lame Wolf, probably," said he, but the distance was too great to enable him to be certain. What puzzled him more than anything was the apparent division of authority, the unusual display of discord among the Sioux. These were all doubtless of the Ogallala tribe, Red Cloud's own people, yet were they wrangling like ward healers and wasting precious time? Whatever his antecedents, this newcomer had been a powerful sower of strife and sedition, for instead of following implicitly the counsels of one leader, the Indians were divided now between three. True to its practice, the prairie wind was sweeping stronger and stronger with every moment, as the sun-warmed strata over the wide, billowing surface sought higher levels, and the denser, cooler current from the west came rushing down. And now all sounds of the debate were whisked away towards the breaks of the South Cheyenne, and it was no longer possible for old Sioux campaigners to catch a word of the discussion. The leaves of the cottonwoods whistled in the rising gale, and every time a pony crossed the stream bed and clambered the steep banks out to the west, little clouds of dun-colored dust came sailing toward the grove, scattered and spent, however, far from the lair of the defense. But while the discussion seemed endless among the Indians on the northward side, never for a moment was the vigilance of the circle relaxed. South, east, and west the slopes and lowlands were dotted with restless horsemen, and from young Clayton came the word that through his glass he could make out 3 or 4 warriors far away towards the Moccasin Ridge. "That's good," said Ray. "It means they, too, are looking for a column coming out from Frayne. But where on earth did all those rascals come from? There must be 400 now in sight." Well might he ask and marvel. Stabber's little village had never more than 50 warriors. Lame Wolf's band was counted at less than 240 fighting men, and these, so said the agents of the omniscient bureau, were all of the Ogallalas, away from the shelter of the reservation when the trouble started. No more should be allowed to go, was the confident promise, yet a fortnight nearly had elapsed since the frontier fun began. News of battle sweeps with marvelous speed through Indian-haunted lands, and here were warriors by the score, come to strengthen the hands of kindred in the field, and more were coming. The mirror signals plainly told them that. Yet it was now well nigh 1 o'clock, and not another hostile move was made. Fox, then, was being held by stronger hands. It meant that Lone Wolf had listened to reason and Stabber, and would permit no fresh attack until his numbers should be so increased that resistance would practically be vain. It meant even more, that the Indian leader in chief command felt sure no force was yet within helping distance of the corralled troopers. He could therefore take his time. But this was a theory Ray would not whisper to his men. He knew Webb. He knew Webb would soon read the signs from the north and be coming to his relief, and Ray was right. Even as he reasoned, there came a message from across the grove. Lieutenant Clayton said the Indians he had seen away to the south were racing back. "Thank God," was the murmured answer no man heard. "Now, lads, be ready," was the ringing word that roused the little troop, like bugle call to arms, and even as eager faces lifted over the low parapets to scan the distant foe, fresh signals came flashing down from the northward ridge. Fresh bands of warriors came darting to join the martial throng about the still wrangling chieftains. And then, all of a sudden, within mighty yelling and shrill commotion, that savage council burst asunder, and, riding at speed, a dozen braves went lashing away to the westward side, while with fierce brandishing of arms and shields, and much cavorting and prancing of excited ponies, the wild battle lines were formed again. The Sioux were coming for the second trial. "Meet them as before, make every shot tell," were the orders passed from man to man, and heard and noted amidst the whistling of the wind and the sounds of scurry and commotion at the front. Then, silent and crouching low, the soldiers shoved the brown barrels of their carbines forth again and waited. And then the grim silence of the little fortress was broken, as, with startling sudden force, there went up a shout from the westward side. "My God, boys, they're setting fire to the prairie!" Ray sprang to his feet and gazed. Away out to the west and southwest, whence came the strong breeze, blowing from the Sweetwater hills, half a dozen dark, agile forms, bending low, were scuttling afoot over the sward, and everywhere they moved there sprang up in their tracks little sheets of lambent flame, little clouds of bluish, blinding smoke, and almost in less time than it takes to tell it, a low wall of fire started in a dozen places, reaching far across the low ground, fencing the valley from stream bed to the southward slopes, crowning by its swift sailing crest of hot, stifling fume, came lapping and seething and sweeping across the level, licking up the dry buffalo grass like so much tow, mounting higher and fiercer with every second, and bearing down upon the little grove and its almost helpless defenders in fearful force, in resistless fury, a charge no bullet could stop, an enemy no human valor could hope to daunt or down. "Quick, man!" yelled Ray. "Out with you! You on the west front, stay you here. You others, watch the Sioux. They'll be on us in an instant." And away he sped from the shelter of the bank, out from the thick of the cottonwoods, out to the open prairie, straight toward the coming torrent of flame, still, thank God, full 700 yards away, but leaping toward them with awful strides. Out with him rushed Field, and out from Clayton's front sped half a dozen old hands, every man fumbling for his matchbox, out until they reached a line with their captain, already sprawled upon the turf, and there, full 100 yards from the grove, they spread in rude skirmish line, and reckless of the mad chorus of yells that came sweeping down the wind, reckless of the clamor of the coming charge, reckless of the whistling lead that almost instantly began nipping and biting the turf about them, here, there, and everywhere. They, too, had started little fires. They, too, had run their line of flame across the windward front. They, too, had launched a wall of flame, sailing toward the grove, and then back. Through blinding smoke they ran for their saddle blankets, just as the sharp sputter of shots burst forth on the northward side, and the Sioux, with magnificent dash, came thundering within range. Then followed a thrilling battle for life. Two red enemies now enrolled against the blue. Fight fire with fire is the old rule of the prairie. Ray had promptly met the oncoming sweep of the torrent by starting a smaller blaze that should at least clear the surface close at hand, and by eating off the fuel, stop possibly the progress of the greater flame. But the minor blaze had also to be stopped, lest it come snapping and devouring within the grove. It is no easy matter to check a prairie fire against a prairie gale when every human aid is summoned. It is desperate work to try to check when to the fires of nature are added the furious blaze of hostile arms, every rifle sighted by savage, vengeful foe. "Check it, lads! 10 yards out!" shouted Ray to his gallant fellows, now lost in the smoke, while he again rushed across the front to meet the charging Sioux. With his brave young face all grime, Field was already at work, guiding, urging, aiding his little band. Both hands, he cried, as, wielding his folded blanket, he smote the fringe of flame. "Stop it out! Great God, Wing! Are you hit?" For answer the sergeant by his side went plunging down, face foremost, and the trooper Denny, rushing to aid his young officer in the effort to raise the stricken man, as suddenly loosed his hold, and then, together again, these two sworn comrades of many a campaign lay side by side, as they had lain in camp and bivouac all over the wide frontier, and poor Denny could only grasp a loyal word of warning to his officer. "Get back, sir! For God's sake, get back!" ere the life-blood came gushing from his mouth. Bending low, Field grabbed the faithful fellow in his strong arms, and calling to the nearmost men to look to Wing, bore his helpless burden back through stifling smoke clouds, laid him on the turf at the foot of the cottonwood, then ran again to the perilous work of fighting the flames, stumbling midway over another prostrate form. "Both hands! Both hands!" he yelled, as again his blanket whirled in the air, and so, by dint of desperate work, the inner line of flame at last was stayed. But every man of the gallant little squad of fire-fighters had paid the penalty of his devotion and felt the sting of hissing lead. Field, the last of all. Westward now, well nigh 100 yards in width, a broad, black, smoking patch stretched across the pathway of the swift-coming wall of smoke and flame, a safeguard to the beleaguered command, worth all the soldier's sacrifice it cost. In grand and furious sweep, the scourge of the prairies sent its destroying line across the wide level to the south of the sheltering grove. But in the blood and sweat of heroic men, the threatening flames of the windward side had sputtered out. The little garrison was safe from one, at least, of its dread and merciless foes, though 5 of its best and bravest lay dead or dying, and others still sore stricken, in the midst of the smoking grove. "Field, old boy," said Ray with brimming eyes, as he knelt and clasped the hand of the bleeding lad, while the Sioux fell back in wrath and dismay from the low-aimed, vengeful fire of the fighting line. "This means the Medal of Honor for you, if word of mine can fetch it." End of chapter 12.